Welcome to Ministries That Podcast, where I talk to successful ministry leaders about how they're using podcasting to amplify their mission and grow their ministry so you can too. I'm Tim Hall, your host and owner of Sonomorphic, a podcast production company that specializes in podcasting for ministries. My guests today are Jessica and Josh White, the creators of Kids Bible Stories, an engaging and artful storytelling podcast for children. They use sound effects and multiple voices to teach young children the Bible and help them apply the gospel to their own lives. Jessica quit her full-time job as a nurse to focus on homeschooling her two children and producing the podcast, which now has over 11 million downloads. In today's episode, we're going to talk about Jessica starting her podcasting journey back in 2017, how Josh started getting more involved with script writing and voice acting, and the hard conversations they've had recently about the financial sustainability of the podcast. So let's jump right in. Here's my conversation with Jessica and Josh White. Well, Jessica and Josh, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. We're glad to be here.
Yeah, so I first heard about Kids Bible Stories podcast when I was looking through the Apple Podcast charts and saw that you were one of the top ranking shows in the religion and spirituality charts on Apple Podcasts. And because you were on the top of the charts there, I clicked on it. I went in and I was like, oh, wow, this is really cool. You have sound effects, you got multiple voices going on and really creating an engaging show for kids that are wanting to learn more about the Bible. And that really resonated with me because I grew up listening to Adventures in Odyssey, and that's what they do, the whole radio drama style thing. So I really enjoy that and love that style. And so now I want to have you on the podcast to share your journey over the past nearly 7 years at this point and 300 episodes about producing Kids Bible Stories. But before we get into it too far, I want to jump back to your podcasting journey and how, Jessica, you actually got started in producing audio content back in college when you recorded audiobooks to cassette tapes for the blind. So I want to hear more about that. Tell me about your experience and how it prepared you for your podcasting journey.
Well, what's so funny is I honestly forgot about that experience until maybe a month ago when we were reminiscing about how faithful God is to kind of fan the flames of our faith and things, and how we were looking back over the years. And I was like, Josh, I forgot. This was before I met him at college, getting an undergrad degree, and I wanted to start volunteering. And so the city that I volunteered in had an opportunity where you could record books for the blind. They requested anything from like novels. Sometimes it will be the Bible. Sometimes it'd be like pamphlets on instructions. Yeah. That interested me just because I thought, what a great opportunity. There's a real need. Someone needs this.
And you can read.
And I can read. And this sounds really embarrassing, but my mom will even tell you this. As a kid, I loved reading out loud. Like my older brother would have to listen to me read in the car out loud. And I'm like in like fourth grade. I'm like reading out loud to the whole car. And so I think that's always been something in there. And so when I came across this volunteer option, I was like, I think this would be great for me. I'd love this. So I would go into this little booth. It was literally a cassette tape, an old school. You got to hit both buttons. Mm-hmm. I'd have a jug of water because like you can't clip it well if you mess up. You have to rewind anyways. So I would do that once a week for a while. And I just liked it. I would just sit in there and read the books. I never met the people whose voice I went to, but it was just neat to see like, wow, I have this kind of passion for all these little things that I would have never, ever guessed that it would translate to this, like I ended up getting a nursing degree, but it's just neat to look back and see the things that God sets you up for that you would have no clue about.
Yeah. I hope that audio content is still out there somewhere.
You have to have a cassette player and play it.
There's cassette players of some yard sale somewhere.
Yeah. Nice. So let's fast forward now. About a decade after that, you are thinking about starting a podcast in around 2017. What made you want to start Kids Bible Stories podcast?
Yeah. So at that time, Josh and I ourselves were just consuming podcasts. We really enjoyed them for like learning, things like that. And so then my kids were young. My oldest was about 3.5 then. And I came across kids podcasts. Like there's a couple that still exist I listened to then that were more like fairy tale. I loved them. I loved them as a mom because they were good and engaging, kid appropriate, and they didn't have a screen. And even when my kids were young, that was a big deal for me. And they were short and perfect, so I could put them on the car to the grocery store. And I thought, wow, my kids are really engaged. This is so cool. Like, wouldn't this be great if we presented the Bible that way? And so I just started looking for a podcast that would have that option. and they just really didn't exist in 2017. It just wasn't for that age and that specific group. It wasn't out there. And so Josh at the time, he can tell you more about this too, but he'd kind of gotten into wanting to do a podcast. So he had figured out the logistics, and he encouraged me and was like, hey, if you want to make one, like I have all the supplies bought for me. He figured all that out and was like, I can show you how to do that. If you want to make it, and just make it for our kids. And so I was like, yeah, that sounds like fun. Like I will make this for our own children. It'll be mom teaching them, and then it's free, and anyone else wants to listen, you know, great. Because if I have this request as a mom, I bet other moms have this one too. It's something I would have wanted as a kid. Like as a kid growing up, I didn't get a lot of context for the Bible or more in depth of the Bible. It's a lot more Sunday school instead of like really immersing myself in, wow, these are real people. And what would it have been like for Joseph or those kinds of things. And I want my kids to really know their Bible and understand that. So that's how it got started.
Yeah.
Nice. So Josh, you got all the equipment. What podcast were you creating, or did you create?
I did. It lasted for a little bit, but not that long. I made one with a few buddies of mine called Manversations. So you could tell it was destined for the podcast graveyard. But it was a fun process. I mean, it was so different back then. You know, now you can go on Amazon and get like a podcast start kit. I went to Guitar Center.
Yeah.
I was like talking to like one of the sound guys in the back, like, here's what I want to do. I just want to talk and record that and put that online. He's like, okay. I think I bought 3 cheap mics, one from Walmart. That was like, base model, whatever. And we just recorded in our living room, and the audio was terrible. And if you listen to the old episodes, they're bad. You can hear air conditioning cutting on and cutting off, and, neighbors and, but that's just how it was. And I think generally speaking, how ministry starts is you have a desire to do something, and so you just figure out how to do it. It's not pretty or glamorous, but that's just how it goes,
Yeah.
Even Josh having had that little legwork logistics behind, I feel like, again, it was the grace of God of like connecting those little dots that we would have never seen if he hadn't had that and encouraged me.
I mean, I think after nursing school, I felt this need to just figure stuff out. I blogged, I vlogged, never going to see those. We did all sorts of things. I was like, nope, podcasting is going to be the one. That's where we're going to make it. And, you just keep trying.
Yeah. Well, and it's proved out. It's proved out over the past 7 years. So well done. As you think back, what stands out from that first year of podcasting?
Oh, the first year, what stands out to me is just, I started it as something that it still is a real passion, but a passion for my family and for those around us that we knew. And then it stood out that like, whoa, people love this. Families want their kids to learn the Bible, which is also extremely encouraging. Yeah. Kids want to hear. I was getting a lot of letters saying my kids love this. They're engaged, even though it's screen-free. Like, that's amazing.
Even though it's screen-free, they're somehow
which engaged. Was huge. And it was free. And so I think for me, the thing that stood out was just like, wow, this is really helping people. And I just didn't see that coming. I really thought it was going to be like, we get 20 downloads an episode.
And we did.
Yeah, for a while.
For a long, I mean, it wasn't even 20. I mean, when you first release stuff, it's like literally 4 downloads, and one's us, one's my mom, the other's her sister, and then one's like a friend, and we're like, please download one, and then you come back.
But within like 4, even 5 months time, or Josh, he would be like, you're going to have 1,000 downloads on an episode one day. And I was like, absolutely not. Like, I might as well be telling me I'm going to go to the moon. Yeah. That's what it felt. And now we have, almost 300,000 a month downloaded.
I mean, it has never been all of a sudden there's a lot of downloads. It was literally 4 and then 7 and then 11 one week and then back to 7 and then 12 and then back to 7. It's just been this slow thing. And people have just shared it and shared it and shared it. And that's one of my big takeaways from the first year is just seeing it grow slowly just because it grew. It's like, you can water a plant and it grows. I don't really know how it grows though. I just know I just put water in this pot and then the plant's bigger. That's kind of how it feels. Like you just keep making episodes and something's happening and more people are downloading it and listening to it. But like, I don't really know how. And
we didn't have a website for 3 years. Like it was just the podcast, and it just blew us away that wow, like this is a thing. People want this. And so that's what really stood out.
Yeah, people just sharing it. We weren't asking people to share. There's no like snappy intro or outro. There's nothing. And it was just free sound clips. And then one mom tells another mom, And maybe a dad tells a dad, doubtful. Most, just people just sharing it. And that's how it grew. And that was my first year takeaway.
Yeah. So as you think back to that time, and now you've been doing it for 7 years, what made you want to keep doing it year after year? Because it is a long process to start growing it.
I think God kind of fanned the flames a lot. He was like, here you go. Like, this is a gift you guys have and you can do this. And honestly, seeing that encouraging feedback from parents was huge because that's what really kept me going. And it is hard because podcasting, you can't see people. I'm not face to face. I also don't have a big Instagram. My thing really was the podcast. And so it's also, I think, hard to do something this long when you don't have a big financial incentive. I think popularity does not equal profitability. It's profitable necessarily, especially in ministry. Even though we are the top children's kids podcast, I think it's easy to say if you had financial gains along the way, that
that would have been super motivating.
But for me, it really was every time I would create a story, I create it as I'm talking to my own children. And then I would hear parents say, you have no idea that my daughter heard that. It's changed her. She remembers it. She is applying it to her little life of sharing with her brother, even though it's so small. Or that when she's nervous, she says, we can pray to God. Remember what Miss Jessica said? That's huge. Yeah. And so just to think that I get to play a part in someone's life doing that, and the parents would trust me to do that, boy, that's really special. So that really fanned the flames to keep it going because it is a roller coaster ride. That's for sure.
Yeah. And it's not intuitive that it keeps going. It's just because you get more downloads, you would think from the outside looking in, that's just such a sweet metric that what you're doing is right. And it is. Life is life. And there's times within that 7 years where it's okay, now we need a new car all of a sudden, or it's a big problem with our house. And it'd be really nice if you got a job, or went back to nursing, and just to be real, ministry is really ministry. This has always been ministry, real ministry. And that's always been the goal. And, those little things like letters and just constant encouragements. And that's really the thing. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's not about downloads. Downloads are great. And it's a cool metric, but it's just a number on a chart. But when someone writes in,
right,
that's when there's a face behind the numbers.
Yes. Yeah.
And every statistic is a story. I heard that a long time ago at an old church of ours. And it's so true. And it means a lot.
Yeah. When you get those reviews, it's so nice to be people are listening and they care. And
a real human.
There are people listening. Yeah, real people. Yeah. So Josh, now you are helping voice some of the voices as y'all are doing the Bible stories. But what point did you get involved? Was it at the very beginning, or did it take some time for you to come around to the idea of maybe I should help out with this?
I've been intermittently involved throughout the 7 years. It's been Jessica 99% of it for 7 years though. And I definitely, helped start it. It's like when guys will say we're pregnant, but it's really she's pregnant. That's really been the story of the podcast for forever. I definitely have played more role over this past 6-7 months. Yeah. Jessica's got this focus where she can get on a task and stay with it every single week just because it's what she wants to do. And that's really been it.
I would say about 4 years ago, I started asking him for voices and be hey, because at the time I just was, again, it's you learn as you go.
Yeah.
And I was hey, you're a man, you're good at doing voices. Would you, if I just write you a script, would you be some of the male characters?
Jesus, Satan, whatever you need.
Every male he has to be. And now we're getting the kids involved. He's always been helpful in that regard. He'll be I'll absolutely do a voice for you and stuff like that. And he even helps. I think there's the behind the scenes help that you don't always see either. Because he works full time, he's very kind to also watch the kids for me on a Saturday morning so I can go out and write for 4 hours or something like that. And so without that help, because we homeschool, that's also kind of the background context. He does things like that. He also helps support the podcast in different ways behind the scenes for sure.
Yeah. I think the biggest way I've supported the podcast is by having a full-time job for forever. That also sounds cheesy. I know people are going to hear that and not hear exactly my heart behind it because I love having a job. I love supporting our family financially. So it's not there's no burden there. That's just, I think that is the reality to ministry a lot. I feel I have no better way of saying it because ministry is really ministry and it's not a business. And I think that's easy to forget that when you're not in the ministry maybe, or when you look at a successful ministry from the outside, you go, man, you're rolling in the dough or something. But I think that's been my biggest contribution to the podcast is just going to work and making sure there's money in the bank account to, buy food and pay for mortgage.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. What would you say, as the two of you have been working on this for a while, I would love to hear what's it been like to work together on a project like this and see it through over years and years?
I think in one way, I mean, it brings us close together because it really is a relying thing since it really is just us. Like it's a family affair. So in one way, it's really cool to know like we have each other's backs, we're there for each other. But it is different. Like we just started, like you said, he started writing a lot more, really helping in that regard with writing. And so, we're different humans. We come at writing differently. And so I think some of our critiques towards each other, you kind of take a little more personally. And so again, this is a newer process for us. So we're working through some of that too, but it's definitely not like you get to go to a coffee shop and be like, let's just talk about great things together with my spouse. And they'll be like, well, I think that theologically, like this way should be shown. And it's like, well, but what about this? And so it definitely engages us to communicate better, but it's definitely interesting trying to like critique carefully with each other, because if someone else said that to you, you'd probably take it very differently. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I mean, we're both humans.
Yeah.
First, we're both sinners with sinful hearts and sinful minds and sinful, prideful spirits. And our love for each other is just like, I mean, we love each other so much, but we're still people. So if I write something and I'm like, this is great, you're going to love it. You're going to read it. You're going to love it. Kids are going to love it. Jesus is clearly honoring it because it's really great. And she's like, well, here's the thing. Maybe not. And it's also part of the writing process and part of the creative process is I definitely feel like I really bend towards the creative. Like I love that. And I don't think I'm as analytical as I could always be. Is that fair? And I think I need the analytical person to kind of give me that because I need that. But, it's hard to hear at first. But I think at the end, it creates a really good product for the people listening.
Yeah.
But like any creative endeavor, like there's iterations of it. Like there's no episode that goes up where that was the episode as written. It's written, it's edited, it's critiqued, it's edited, and then it goes out.
Like we really want parents to know we really put a lot of thought, prayer, and research behind every episode.
Yeah. Yeah. Even we listen to episodes and afterwards I'm like, we shouldn't have used that word. Oh, are people really going to hate that word?
Yeah.
We should have said this instead of that. Oh, no, my goodness. And we just try to get better, but I've really enjoyed working with Jess. It would be a problem if we didn't.
Yeah. So there's multiple pieces, as you know. You got the script, as you're talking about. You got to actually record the thing. You've got the different voices. You got to put it together and edit it together. What parts of those processes do you each enjoy doing, and which parts of those processes do you own?
I owned pretty much all of it up until recently, minus like Josh will do the male voices. The kids will do some answers back. So recently, Josh is doing more of the writing, though. I will do any kind of writing edits, record. I do all of the audio edits. And then just behind the scenes, there's the emails, there's the taxes. That's always not the best, enjoyable. Responding to emails, tech problems, swapping platforms, starting to do more social media. So I do all of the Patreon page that we've created. So I do those kinds of things. And he's focusing a lot on writing. Or even sometimes if I write, I will give it to him and be like, hey, like go through it. Like be my opposition and tell me like yay or nay,
Yeah. So. And then last year I took over writing the episodes, and I'd say I kind of bring them together. That sounds so silly, but that's how I frame it in my head. Because writing the Bible. I'm just looking at Noah and imagining, what did Noah say to his sons? What do they think? What animals were their favorite and why? I know that sounds really silly, but this is the weird like rabbit trails that I run down when I go in a story. And like I know the story of Noah, but what's the story that kids are going to get a specific lesson? I think about pastors who've been preaching for 20 years and from the same book every Sunday. And they've titled Noah, oh my gosh, how many times? But it's a different sermon every time. I want to make sure that we're able to do that for our audience.
My favorite part, though, I think would be editing sound effects. That's actually really fun. It's a lot of time, but it's so fun. And then the application part, because I love seeing my kids get to understand how this kind of applies to their life in a kid way. They can actually take away and do something with it or remember something from it.
That's big. That's really big. I like that too a lot. I really love seeing a story, like a big 10-minute story, come together in a final sentence or two that encapsulates all of it in a way that is memorable, not simple, but succinct. Succinct for an 8-year-old. That's really hard. Yeah. And there's something special for that. And if you hit that nail on the head, it's like, we did it. Awesome.
Yeah, that's really cool. I saw recently that you've crossed the 11 million download mark, which is crazy, fantastic. So I'm curious, what has been your best strategy for growing the podcast audience and reaching more families, as it has been a slow process over time?
Honestly, it is the grace of God. Like,
The Holy Spirit, is that,
and that's
is that what you're looking
but
for?
People, let me see how big it is. I think I can't speak for all, but a lot of podcasters probably spend a lot of money in ad revenue or have a bigger platform someplace else
Yeah.
that they transition from. And so they had that coming in.
Yeah.
So when I say like, it is a miracle, it is a real miracle of God. I think we didn't do anything for the first 3 or 4 years. It was literally word of mouth. I think being consistent, it was just the product itself was good. We were consistent. Parents knew they could trust us and that they knew what they were going to get each time. Like going to Chick-fil-A, it's like the consistency that, you know what you're going to get. Yeah. And so I think that they came to love it. And some kids love it so much. We've had parents say that they've listened since 2017. It's like my kids' age and they just go right on up with it. So really just word of mouth, parents. And then in the last few years, I started doing some Facebook ads for specific demographics. But I mean, it's bare bones that we spend on it.
It's like a child's allowance.
Yeah. So I think it's just really the Holy Spirit and then just being consistent over time. You know?
I think a takeaway though for people that are listening who would consider a podcast is, I mean, and everyone will say this, like you have to do a few things, but you must be consistent. Mm-hmm. If you're going to do it, you have to commit to whatever your release schedule is going to be every week, every other week, 3 weeks a month. You must do that. That is non-negotiable. And then you actually have to, sounds also silly, you have to create compelling content. Mm-hmm. And that's like, seems so obvious, but it's not necessarily obvious what's compelling in my mind. Like I can listen to a podcast and I'm like, why do people like this so much? It's not obvious to me that this is, and I know it's big, but I don't know why. I listen to it and I still can't figure that out. So that's not always so obvious. And I think what's beautiful is that, Jessica, when you originally started, there was genuinely a need in that area. And also you're really passionate about kids. Mm-hmm. You're really passionate about Jesus. And I know that comes through in the audio. So if someone were to want to do something, I would encourage you, if your thing you love is just like trading Pokemon cards as an adult, but you love it, like that comes through. And that really, that makes for something compelling. Energy and enthusiasm, you can't fake.
Yeah.
And love for something you can't fake. And that love for something will come through. If you want to start a podcast to make money, you can talk about something, but if you're not in love with that something, I mean, where's it going to go? Because someone is going to be in love with it and they're also going to talk about it and they're going to get the audience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so just consistency, being in love with what you're talking about, I think is really big.
Yeah, together.
Yeah. And it's a slow crawl. I mean, 7 years is a long, we could be doctors by now. You think about that? That we spent 7 years talking to a mic, we could both have PhDs, I mean, that's a real consideration too,
There's a lot of time to put in, and consistency over time is huge. I mean, when I work with clients, I'm telling them, at the beginning, you have to know why you're doing this. It has to be something that you're wanting to do. And if you can't come up with a list of 25 topics or 25 guests that you want to have on from the onset, you're probably not that passionate.
You're done. So go to medical school.
Yeah.
And I mean that gracefully, because doctors make a ton of money and they do really impactful work. Do you know what I mean? That's so real. It's got to be something you love.
I think you nailed it when you said you got to really know your why. It kind of has to be bigger than you. It's very, like you said.
Otherwise, you're going to smolder out when your bills are paid, or when your bills aren't paid, rather. And you're like, I could do another podcast, or I could go pick up a shift at work. And the shift at work is a guaranteed whatever money. And my garage door doesn't work,
Well, like this last summer, I got pretty sick and it took doctors about 6 weeks to figure out what's going on with me. And then I had surgery the year prior. We moved a year and no one else is going to do it. You got to do it. So I had to still record. I had to still edit.
You still act chipper when you're just vomiting, but you have to get the episode out.
And I trust that God, God's going to do what he's going to do. He could make it keep going just fine without my help. But I do want to be a good steward. And I think any business or ministry business, whatever it is, if you're podcasting or have a brick and mortar building, if you're not there to do the work, no one else is going to step in for you to do it. I think that's what's quite challenging. I'm sure you've experienced with your own products too. No one else is going to do it for you.
Yeah, it's both. It's like ministry is such an interesting thing because it is God. Like we said, the Holy Spirit was grow this, and that is so true. But you still have to do all the work. Like sometimes that's how the Holy Spirit moves in your ministry, is you working your butt off for 7 years. And that's not like, I don't know how that plays in a pulpit, but like I think that's also real, because it really is the Holy Spirit. It really is. And we've worked really hard for 7 years. Like, what do you do with both those answers?
Yeah.
It's both.
Yeah. So I used to work at Ramsey Solutions, and Dave Ramsey would say, work like it all depends on you and pray like it all depends on God.
Yeah.
You got to have both. You can't just pray and hope that it's going to happen. You got to actually do something.
It's in the Lord's hands.
So,
Yeah, that's a great point.
You need like 2 hands too.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. So there are, as you said, there's expenses to the show, there's bills to be paid, and you rely on donations, on Patreon, on sponsorships to support the show. And I recently saw your episode that you put out towards the beginning of this year titled Please Help Us, where you shared the news that the podcast actually couldn't be sustained without additional support. So if you're willing, I'd love to hear your story about and the hard conversations that took place surrounding the future of the podcast and where it's at now.
It's kind of fun to be transparent, and we try to do that with that episode for our listeners.
That's also the first time we've really done that. So as far as it's been to be transparent, it's been a debate for a long time.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to put that on an audience.
We are very human, and we're husband and wife. We pay bills. And so for me, I know that family also has bills, and I know life is expensive, and I do not take lightly someone giving money to this ministry, this podcast to keep going.
It's really, it's wild.
We've really held off on trying to ask. So to kind of give the backstory of how we got there was, for the first 4 years of the podcast, we didn't make any money. It was just, I worked as a nurse once a week. Josh worked full time.
And then obviously it costs money.
Yeah, that's how we were just losing money.
I mean, you have to pay money to store the audio. You remember back in the old days, you had to pay a hosting website money based on how much audio you wanted to put up. So if you wanted an hour of audio a month, and if you wanted them to save it for you had to pay even more money. So it's a lot nicer now. It's basically like YouTube now. It's just so simple and wonderful. But back in the day, you had to pay money if you wanted people to hear you. And so it was like a part of like a tithe. Like our monthly tithing would go to our podcast. It was like a ministry.
People would sometimes say, hey, like, I would love to support you. Like, could I just give you, it's $5. I'm like, that's so kind, amazing. Yes. So then I'd open up a PayPal, and I was like, well, maybe some people do want to. So occasionally throughout the 3 years, I would say, hey, if this has brought value to you and you would like to support us, like, we appreciate that. Thank you. And that was it. Well, in 2020, Anchor, called Spotify for Podcasters now, approached me and was like, hey, you should try coming to us because we like what you're doing and we can help you with ads. And in my mind, I had tinkered with ads and had a terrible experience. I was like, I'm not doing that again. Yeah. They're like, no, we're different. So I was like, okay, maybe it's a door, the door's opening. I'll try it. I'll learn. So I went over to them in 2020, and they actually did a great job. And
they're great.
I'm grateful for them because it helped us get where we are now. So they gave me an ad that I would read. And I'm sure if you've ever listened to the episode, you've heard it and are probably tired of it, but it's what helped it go.
Yeah, thank you for that ad.
Thank you. Yeah. So we would have an ad given to us by, I'll call them Spotify for Podcasters because that's what they are now. And so I read that for 2 years. We would get an income from them. And again, this is by no means a full-time income, not even really a part-time income, but it was enough for me to stop nursing because God always knows what he's doing. Right at that time, it kind of was coming to a head. The kids were getting older. I was homeschooling. Homeschooling was taking more time. I was working as a nurse once a week, and the podcast was also consuming more time. And so I had to give something up.
Yeah.
And because of those ads, it was enough to substitute my income from nursing, and I could come home and do podcast and homeschool. So that's what we were relying on, and that's what sustained this. And now...
And that was really also like, it was kind of a moment where it's like, okay, this has always been a ministry, and this is going to continue to be a ministry. And if God's in it, it's going to work. And this is where it is like, this is the Holy Spirit. We're going to keep doing the work. We're going to keep working like everything depends on us. But now we're going to lean on the Holy Spirit. We're getting these ads. It makes some money. And if God's going to bless, he's going to bless it. And it's going to be just enough to keep paying our bills.
So that's what has been helping us for the past few years. And so 2024, Spotify for Podcasters put out an email to everybody who had this specific ad. Say, hey, we're cutting this ad from everybody. You have 30-day notice, which I understand their business. I completely get it. Like, I'm grateful for what they allowed us to do. At that point, God had put on my mind real hard in the summer, you really need to be like not so reliant on ads. And I kind of had that feeling before. So I was like, okay. And that's when Patreon was birthed this July. So very recently. And I thought, this is a way that I can, for me to feel comfortable asking for donations. You get extra on top of that for your support. And it's stuff that my kids love. Like my kids love coloring and listening. So I always create a product that like my kids themselves would enjoy and that makes sense. I'm not just trying to sell something.
Yeah.
So that got birthed, and thank goodness it did, because in February, all those ads went away. And so we were at a real crux. And so we knew this was going to happen in January. Patreon had been set up with the hopes that maybe it would give us a little buffer, and it really wasn't. And so Josh and I had a hard conversation of like, we have maybe a month and a half, because again, I do have to bring in some money for us to pay our bills, and we either have to charge for the episodes, which we don't feel comfortable with.
I don't want to do that ever.
We want kids. I mean, there are kids all over the world that cannot afford this.
We get so many contacts from kids in just the most impoverished areas. And it's like, you don't want to charge these families to hear about Jesus. Like, that is absolutely not what we want to do. But at the same time, like, it's a little bit of money, but it's like our mortgage, like, what does that look like for us? And for me, we're still working like it depends on us, praying like it depends on the Holy Spirit. And I'm like, we'll start a Patreon. And Jess, obviously, 300,000 downloads a month, there's a lot of listeners. What if just 10% of listeners give us $1 a month? We'll be rich, Jess. We'll make podcasts every day. And you know what I mean? Like, your head starts, you start running numbers. If just 1 in 10 people give us just $1, we'll be doing great. And like, that doesn't happen. Yeah. And then it's like, well, what do you do? I mean, surely they get value out of this. Surely it's just our American listeners could do $1. And if just our American listeners did $1 a month, it would be Podcast Central. We could do so much with that. We get it translated into other languages there, which we want to do. We'd love for this to be in Spanish and all these other languages. Let people in other countries reach out and please do this in our other language. Like, yes, I would love that, but I don't speak any other languages, and we still have to homeschool and work full time. And this is not, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's so wild how it all works out.
So because of that removal from the ads pretty quickly, we
like
just
30 days.
Hey, we don't want to charge for it. So let's just be really honest. We haven't ever given in 7 years a big ask of like, hey, we really, really do need your support, or it's going to have to either stop completely and I'm going to go back to work. Because reality is, like, I think the world kind of lies to us and says you can have your cake and eat it too. But no, you can't. I'm a mother who feels called to homeschool, so don't feel like I want to give that up either. And so I can't do it all. Like, I do have to choose.
Yeah.
And also holding it loosely open with hands, like, there will be a day where this will eventually end, and that's okay. Like, this is not my podcast. This is God's doing. Yeah. So I wanted to have open hands. Like, maybe we are supposed to do something different, but I didn't feel comfortable just walking away from it without being honest with our listeners who value it, love it, and saying, hey, this is where we're at. We really do need your help. Like, we don't have advertisers lined up. Advertising on kids content and Christian content, I've been told by a lot of people, they really don't want to have much to do with me.
Which is crazy, because again, if you hear like our download count, you would think, oh man, like if you look at the charts, like the Christian charts, it'll be like Joel Osteen, Kids Bible Stories, Elevation Church. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like legit big ministries.
Yeah.
And we're definitely the only one recording in a closet. Again, like, there's nothing wrong with that. This is beautiful. I'm so blessed, so thankful to be able to be a part of this. And if it is always being recorded in our bedroom closet, like, wonderful. I think that suits also my temperament, so I'm totally cool with that. But that's what it is, and that's okay, and that's what ministry is, and that's what we wanted people to know so that they can have a part in playing in it. And I think that's one thing that I think I felt too when we started talking about this big ask is, I think by not asking sometimes, you might even keep someone who wants to be a part of a ministry away from it because they don't know. I think that's also something that I had to get over personally because I really don't like asking for help.
Because once we asked, I was blown away that, yes, we're still not at a point where the ask from Patreon and their support could sustain us alone.
Yeah.
But it was more than I expected, and I am beyond grateful for it. And Lord willing, again, he works in amazing ways. I just feel like it was like he wrapped his arms around us from our listeners. And I try and convey it to the listeners of like, I know you think you're just giving, but like you literally are crucial to the foundation of this. Like you are actually making this go. If it's $5, $10, and everyone's combined, it's incredible. And even before we put this ask out, someone approached us randomly. We knew this was going to happen. But we didn't put the ask out yet.
Yeah, we
And it
were
was just
going
like,
to ask for help,
yeah.
but we hadn't done it yet. We'd come to the place where like, Jessica, we got to do it. I don't want to record this episode because I don't want to ask people to help us because that's just my pride. But I really don't. I want to be able to just do this because we're just going to force it into being. And we already decided. And then
So a sweet family approached us and just had donated on our PayPal, which in my mind was an amazing amount. And I just told her, like, I just want to tell you the behind the scenes because I love hearing the stories of how God's working.
Yeah.
I was like, you don't know what's happening, but this is what you just did. And then she replied, it was like, well, guess what else? Like we've been praying about. And so it's those amazing moments where I just see God saying, keep going. You've got to keep doing this. And the joy that people are like joyful to support it is beautiful.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where we're at. So people have given, which is great, and joined Patreon. We've also been trying to be good stewards though. Like we want a long-term solution.
yeah.
So we are in works with a contract with someone who could help us for at least 12 months. And that way between that plus the support, we should be able to continue as is and prayerfully, hopefully even do more one day, you know? So
Yeah, thanks for sharing that story
yeah.
of all that's transpired in the past, couple of years. It sounds like it's been rather crazy, but you've been faithful through it. So now that you're at this point, what are you excited about for the future of Kids Bible Stories?
I think honestly, after all that, I was telling Josh, I feel like I'm still kind of like I'm treading water. So
Yeah.
I feel like for a little excitement, I'm excited to kind of breathe for a month if everything transfers over well. Like we're hoping to just continue as it is and just kind of, okay, we're going to be able to keep going.
Yeah.
After that, I think for me, I am really excited at the possibility, if Lord willing, we could, to translate it. We get a lot of requests for translation.
Yeah.
And we've looked in a lot of ways of how to do it.
There's no easy ways.
Yeah, it comes down to expenses and finding a person who's theologically accurate as well that you can trust to translate and have all the tech and understand how to behind the scenes of creating it. So, but that would be exciting. So that's kind of what excites me, is thinking of maybe we could provide that one day for families.
I'm excited for all the big things too. All these milestones that I'd love to see hit so we can continue the ministry. I don't think too far ahead because I really want to stay involved in like what's the next series. So I'm really excited for Easter. And I think that's where my headspace is because I think I want to be really excited about the next series that we're doing so that it's just a beautiful series. And when that one's done, I want to be really excited for the one after that. And I think that's the rhythm that best serves my headspace.
All right, well, that brings us to the high pass segment, which is where we ignore the lows and I ask you about some of your favorite things. Little audio pun here. These will be rapid fire. What's been one of your favorite Bible stories to produce?
Easter and Christmas each year, because we usually do at least about 4 episodes for either one to have the kids have some context, and just showing the kids in a way that they can grasp that Jesus died for you. He was born for you. He loves you. You are part of his story, and being able to explain that to kids in a very real way where like a light bulb goes off and it's more than just head knowledge, it's heartfelt and knowledge. It is incredible. And so I love doing those because each time it's so cool to be able to have kids understand that and not just think, oh, Jesus died on the cross for me. Cool. But like we really try, and one year we created one about like understanding kind of debt as a sin and things like that in a very kid way that's one, not scary, but also very like, oh, I can kind of put my head around that a little bit. And so those are some of my favorites.
Yeah, that's good. I can't follow the gospel if I say, story of Samson at this point. Yeah. But to piggyback on what you said, I know for me personally, I grew up in the church, and you hear some of these things so often that it becomes like part of just like Christian vernacular. And so Christ died on the cross, I mean, you almost can hear it so much that you don't hear it anymore. And I think that those episodes are really important to us because you can do an episode on not an obscure, but like not a well-known story within the Bible, and it feels fresh because it's fresh. Like how many people hear about this story? But when you hear about a story about like the Christmas story or crucifixion or the resurrection, I mean, everybody's been to church for any extended period of time, especially kids growing up in the church. I mean, those are like those are your greatest hits. You're hearing those constantly. And so I think to say it in such a way where it's not new, but it's said that where they can hear it fully is really special.
Yeah. All right. What's your favorite part about having a podcast?
My favorite part is that I love it because, one, it's screen-free. So as a parent, again, that was one of my motivations.
We live in the woods.
No, we're not that. We're not that, like, it's through screens or something, but like, I love that it's screen-free. It engages their brains when they're listening to, well, the Bible is not a story. It's real. We tell children that all the time, but the way that it's done in a storytelling format engages their brain in a different way. And I think a healthy way, a good way. And so I love that it's audio. I love podcasting because it's free. So there is that lack of barrier of finances for people to hear our podcast. And the fact that podcasting technology exists where it can go out all over pretty much is incredible. And so that's one of the reasons I love podcasting.
Yeah. I think too, like the barrier to entry is so low. I mean, anybody listening to this podcast can start a podcast by the end of this podcast on their cell phone, which is wild, but it's beautiful. I think that's really cool. I think that's really, really cool. And I think, I've been thinking about burial and resurrection and Christ's ascension. I'm doing a lot of reading on that, preparing for Easter. I've been thinking about the Great Commission a lot. And this is such a wild platform for Christians to utilize in that, like, our friends at the street listen, which is really beautiful. Kids at our church listen. And then also kids within our state listen back where we used to live. And then also kids all around the world listen. And it's such a beautiful way to articulate like how to facilitate the Great Commission in such a simple and straightforward and streamlined and 2024 cool way. And I think that's really neat.
Yeah. All right. Last question in the segment. What's one of your favorite stories from a listener about how Kids Bible Stories has impacted their life?
One of my favorites has been, we've had a couple parents write in saying that their children don't believe or they're really not sure. Their children kind of verbalize this kind of language, yet they continue to ask to listen. And they said, I just want to write you to know that because, like, who knows what the Holy Spirit's doing through that? Like, they're thankful that they want to listen. And I just think that's beautiful to think that, again, that God will allow us to play an opportunity in that, and that maybe that child will, through hearing the Bible come to life in that way, start to really answer some of the questions they have or ask, why do I believe what I believe? And if they're little, kids have those good questions. And so those are my favorites, is hearing that, a child might be questioning or on the fence, but they still want to listen. That is amazing.
Yeah. Same for me. It's just so cool to know that kids that I know, my kids' friends and children of my friends, listen and hear reports of the things that they're saying is really special, because I have a personal stock in the lives of these children because I know them, and I'm probably going to know them for a really long time. And to hear their parents tell me, hey, they said this, and I was like, oh, that's so amazing. Knowing that that's happening everywhere, that is the coolest thing. That feels great.
All right. Well, as we wrap up today's episode, what's your best advice? Now that you've been doing this for 7 years, what's your best advice for someone who wants to start their own podcast this year?
I think it kind of goes back to what you hit on earlier, is ask yourself why and be really honest. What's your motive? If your motive is you have something you really want to say and you don't just want to be more noise and you really are passionate about what you want to say, it can be something really specific or broad, whatever, but like, why do you want to do it? Really understand your why, what's your motive, and be consistent. It is a law. If you want podcasting, for you to, quote, feel successful, if you want it to hit certain numbers or finances, like, you have to be patient. It is a long-term game. I mean, the podcast world is kind of a graveyard out there. If you look at a lot, haven't been updated. I think the stats are like 50% don't even have any updates for like 2 or 3 years. It's pretty large. So if you have the passion and the commitment, consistency, like, you could last and you can be out there. And so just kind of asking yourself those questions about why you want to do it.
If you start a podcast, people should think of it, like, conceptualize it as a lifestyle now. And that might be a weird way to do it, but like diets aren't successful because they're diets. And then when you're done with the diet, you're back to what you're, but like, if you start podcasting, like, you're now a podcaster. It's something that you do.
And don't get disheartened in analysis paralysis. If you get the little things you need to do to actually create and just do it. When I listen back to my old audio, I want to cringe because I don't think it's very good.
You try to take it down.
And people want it back up, so we put it back up. But you'll hear like a lot of people that you see who've been doing something for 17 years, you see them change, and that's normal.
Yeah. And that's how it should be.
You live and learn. This mic is the same mic we've had for 7 years. We record in a closet. Life keeps going. I had to work during, most of this while we kept doing it, but don't let it stop you that you don't have a website or a giant Instagram. If you want to do the podcast, you're going to do it. Just start.
It's not about any of that stuff. Anybody who thinks they need a website first and a nice recording computer and like their first 100 episodes written out and this enormous guest list, like those are all really good things to have and probably wise. But
some planning.
But like just you can kind of jump and learn how to fly on the way down with some things. And I think this is one of those forgiving venues where if you think you're going to be good at it when you start, you don't understand what you're doing. This is not that. Podcasting is an art form. And the way you get better at the art is by doing the art. Mm-hmm. And if you want to be good at it, you must do the art and just accept that part of the journey is not being good at first. And that's really hard because I think we have this expert culture where everyone has to be an expert at something. And the culture itself does not lend it to beginners. That's just our culture in general, not just podcasting. That's just who we are, I think, as people now. And so you have to recognize like you are going to be a beginner and enjoy that process and enjoy the fact that you don't realize what you don't know, because soon you're gonna. And if you had understood everything that it entailed, what you're asking, you might not have started the project. You would have just gone to med school and been a doctor, because it's straightforward and you can see the curriculum on day one. But in starting a business or a podcast, you can't. So I think consistency is great. I think having your why is a really big deal. Mm-hmm. And that sounds so cheesy again, but if you're not connected with that deeply and not passionate about the topic, I could never sustain something that I was not passionate about, like to my core.
Even homeschooling, I have to have a why, almost like a mission statement. Because you're at days you're like, I don't want to do this. Get on the bus. We're going.
They have buses.
And you're like, okay, hold on. Is my why?
Why are we not using the buses?
Yeah. Is my why big enough still? Am I still? And it's okay if it's okay if life changes, but like
it really is.
That's just an example of like I feel like whys are so important in big parts of your life. They're going to do something long term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, Jessica, Josh, thank you so much for sharing your journey in podcasting for the past 7 years now and the struggles along the way and the learnings along the way. It's definitely a journey, and thanks for sharing that with us.
Thank you for having us on. It's great talking with you.
I really enjoyed my conversation with Jessica and Josh and getting to hear their podcasting journey over the past 7 years. Now, Jessica's reminder there at the end was so good. You have to be willing to play the long game in podcasting. You have to be patient and just keep publishing episodes. And then Josh's point too about podcasting being an art form was so well said. Your podcast is probably not going to be great when you start, but if you want to get good at the art of podcasting, you have to keep doing the art. You have to keep recording and publishing episodes and just getting better over time. That's some great wisdom from their years of experience following their own advice. You can listen to Kids Bible Stories with the link in the show notes. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Ministries That Podcast, produced by Sonomorphic. If you enjoyed today's episode, text it to a friend or share it on social media. Together, we can help more ministries grow and thrive through podcasting. And if you haven't already, follow or subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on the next one. And leave a 5-star review while you're at it. Now come back in 2 weeks to hear my conversation with Fallon Klug. She's the Director of Operations for That Sounds Fun Network, the podcast network that best-selling author Annie F. Downs started with Kelly Haywood back in 2020. Fallon and I are going to talk about her start in production as a page for The Late Show with David Letterman, the benefits of being part of a podcast network, and we even dive into growth strategies and podcast advertising. It was a really fun conversation. Well, until next time, keep encouraging your audience as they follow Jesus.